Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about this upcoming weekend and how there's probably going to be a little bit more chaos than we see coming, and definitely one of those things that just happens in college football. So be on the lookout for that. But let's get into all the games we just haven't had a chance to get to throughout the week. Definitely some big time ones that obviously this week, not necessarily that marquee game, plenty of games that are going to be really, really fun to watch. And we got a good one yesterday. Texas State is a real team. They're so much fun to watch. One of those teams, Jordan McLeod running the offense very, very efficiently. Jaden Williams is an absolute star on the outside along with Joey Hobart. You have Ishmael Mahdi, incredible running back, along with Torrance Burgess Jr. This team is as elite as it gets on the G5 level. I think they might just be on a collision course with JMU in the Sun Belt. They have a huge game at the end of the year against South Alabama. That's going to be one worth watching. I can absolutely promise you that. Jordan McLeod against Gio Lopez is going to be tons of fun to watch, and very well could send them into the playoff or into the championship for the Sun Belt from the West. So it's going to be really, really fun to watch this team unfold. Had 252 through the air, 215 on the ground, held Troy to 1.9 yards per carry. If that's the way they're going to go about business, they're going to be really, really tough to beat. If they can run for over 200 and hold you to, I believe the number ended up being somewhere in the 60s. If that's the way they're going to go about business, they're going to be nearly impossible to beat in this conference. They're an absolutely elite team. GJ Kinney's done an incredible job with that entire program, and especially that offense right about now. It is so much fun to watch. So anytime you turn on Texas State, I can almost promise you're getting a little bit of a show, and you very well could be watching the team that ends up being that group of 5 participant. They do have 2 losses on the season, so a little bit tougher of a path, but if they roll the rest of the way like this, then they very well could be one of those elite G5 teams. Then you got an elite game tonight. I cannot wait for this game. It's a game that we've touched on a little bit this week, but it deserves its own shine here. I think it's one of those games that you have UNLV with as much energy as really anyone in the country right about now, and then Kyle McCord trying to just get his season a little bit back on track after a very tough performance against Stanford. I still think they have a chance in the ACC race. Obviously, Clemson and Miami have started to kind of pace themselves. Let's say Clemson just isn't quite the team that we have seen the past couple of weeks. Let's say they go into Clemson, go into Florida State, only win by 6-10 points, and we come out of it being like, okay, maybe Clemson was a little bit closer to week 1 than the last couple of weeks. So could be a really interesting conference. If Syracuse wins this game, then I have a little bit of confidence going with them going forward. I think Stanford's one of those teams that you can't necessarily count out a team because they lose to Stanford, because they're such a weird team to deal with. So it's one of those games that I just think we're going to have a ton of fun. I think there's going to be points on the board. I think Haj Malik Williams, whenever you watch him on the field, it is a special thing to witness. And then you got a team in Syracuse that is really fighting for their lives in some ways in this game. Then you got another ACC matchup. That team we just talked about, Stanford, is taking on Virginia Tech. They're hosting Virginia Tech, so another team that's heading all the way out west for their first conference matchup. And it's going to be a tough one. No two ways about that. Virginia Tech coming off a very, very tough loss to Miami, one that I'm absolutely certain they feel like they should have won, and they feel like they got kind of screwed out of a call. So it's one of those things that they got to be coming into this one with energy, or they could be coming to this one a little bit defeated. We'll figure out what that team is on Saturday. And then Ashton Daniels is becoming one of the more fun quarterbacks in the entire country. And it's kind of because he's a threat all over the field, but also he likes to throw the ball to the other team from time to time. So kind of makes it for a fun college football game at the end of the day. I think Virginia Tech is one of those teams that I think they found something offensively last week. It's obviously not something that is going to be, consistent week over week, because a lot of it was broken plays. Doesn't change that I think they found a little bit of a groove. I think Baishal Tootin is finding himself, and I think it'll be tough for Stanford to get this one done. That being said, with the travel factor and everything going into this game for Virginia Tech, maybe they just slip up again. Then you got a conference matchup in the Big 12, and I think people have counted out Oklahoma State, and I kind of understand that, if I'm being totally fair going forward. The thing is, I don't think West Virginia's out of it. They have 2 losses. They're both out of conference to Penn State and Pitt in a fashion that, frankly, they shouldn't have lost. But at the end of the day, they're in a position where they very well could still be in the Big 12 race. They need a big-time win here at Oklahoma State, and Oklahoma State seemed like they kind of found Ollie Gordon in the last game, at least early on in that game, and then it obviously got away from them. They had to start passing the ball more, but maybe this is one of those games that he actually breaks out. He becomes, he is a premier back in this sport. He's got to prove it up this upcoming weekend, and West Virginia is a very solid defense. So we'll figure out what they can do. I think West Virginia is one of those teams that you haven't seen what you wanted to see from them by any means, but with Garrett Green, with all of those guys on that team, I still think they have an ability to make a little bit of a run. It would just have to start on Saturday or on tomorrow against Oklahoma State. Then you got another one in that conference, and this one is a little bit sketchy for Iowa State. They have to be very, very careful in this one. Baylor obviously coming off a couple of losses that just really hurt. Colorado on that crazy play at the end by LaJohntay Wester, and then BYU, you come all the way back and then barely lose in that game. So it could be one of those things that if they fall in this one, then we know the fate of Dave Aranda going forward. We know the fate of this team going forward. Don't want that to happen by any means, but that's kind of the reality of where they're standing right about now. I do think Iowa State's one of those teams that, why can't they be the top team in the conference? I think we're spending so much time talking about Utah when Cam Rising is back. Frankly, I don't know when that's going to be. And KSU, a very, very good team, they've been a little bit inconsistent. Iowa State's been the team that showed up every single week, played elite defense, taking care of the ball. Rocco Becht is making his next step forward, and they're doing a lot of really fun things with that offense. I think they have so many weapons. Abu Sama is going to be a dangerous player throughout the rest of the season. They have an elite duo in Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. They're going to be a really fun team, and frankly, I have them as my top team in the conference. At least in terms of ranking, they are the number one team in the conference. I would have them as my favorite to make this the conference championship as of right now. But it's one of those games that I think the Big 12 is going to be defined by this year, where you have a team that probably shouldn't get a win going into another environment and then comes out with a win miraculously. So Iowa State's got to make sure they handle business, and if Baylor doesn't, then I think we kind of know what Dave Aranda is going to look like at the end of the season, probably looking for a job somewhere. And then you got the in-state rivalry in Florida going on this weekend. One game that a lot of air has been taken out of the balloon in this one. I can promise you that. But UCF obviously getting rolled last week by Colorado put them in a really interesting position. They are not necessarily out of the race in the Big 12, but a lot of people have kind of put them there for the time being, and probably I have as well. We'll see what happens in this game, but Florida is in a really weird spot just the rest of the season. I think they're one of those teams, kind of like Florida State, which we'll talk about here in a bit, but it's one of those teams where you're having a nightmare season. No one's here to tell you that you're not. I think wins over UCF and FSU could kind of salvage this nightmare, make them feel a little bit better about where they are, a little bit better about where they're standing going forward. Obviously, I don't think Billy Napier is going to be the head coach going forward. That being said, you got to show a pulse. You got to show that these players really care. You got to show that this, putting on that uniform still means something to these kids, and they go out there and get big-time wins in these type of games, in these rivalry games where you're going to have a lot of people in the state of Florida, a lot of recruits in the state of Florida watching this game. Make sure you prove a point in it. And then for UCF, you have a shot to get back in the Big 12 race. You took a very, very tough loss a week ago to Colorado. You get a big-time win here. You move back on into the Big 12 game. Maybe things get a little bit more interesting. But it's one of those games that I like Florida in it. I do think Florida's kind of finding a little bit of a level in this season, kind of finding their groove just a little bit. Not necessarily an elite groove by any means, but definitely a team that is finding it just a little bit more. And UCF, I don't know what they're going to do with KJ Jefferson at quarterback. He can't really throw the ball downfield. They're not getting the run game going nearly enough, and Florida's going to do everything they can to stop that run game, the same way Colorado did. So it's going to be a really tough matchup for UCF. I do like Florida in it, but one of those games that could set up one for really elite success, could set up the other for just an absolutely disaster season. Then you got another Big 12 matchup out there. Kansas-Arizona State is so interesting to me. It's one of those games where it's going to be a really fun Big 12 game. I'm not sure how much either of these teams is really going to factor into the end of the year. If you really like running the ball, if you like run fit, if you like scheming up runs and elite running backs, go to this game. You have Devin Neal, Daniel Highshaw, one of the most underrated duos of the bunch in the entire country on the Kansas roster. And then you got Cam Scadaboo on the other side. It's going to be so much fun to watch these two offenses go at each other. And I think it's one of those games where neither of these teams are really going to factor into the Big 12 race. I feel pretty confident saying that. That doesn't change they have a lot to play for, especially for Kenny Dillingham. You're still trying to build what you have over there. And then for Lance Leipold, you're just trying to make these fans feel a little bit better about what the season is. Obviously not the season that you wanted, and it's probably not going to be the going forward, but at the end of the day, getting a win like this at least makes them feel a little bit better about where they stand, and then you can move forward, try to rebuild this thing at least in 2025. So going to be a really fun matchup, one of those that is going to sneak under the radar. Maybe you look up late in this game, and it's an absolute shootout back and forth, so much fun to watch. And then finally, my most fun game of the week, frankly, and it's at 11 p.m. on Saturday, as it often, frankly, is. But Texas Tech, Arizona is going to be tons of fun to watch. Arizona favored by 6.5 right now, and it's a huge game in the Big 12. And frankly, I didn't necessarily peg it as a huge game in the Big 12 once we got to this time of year, but Texas Tech is 2-0 in conference play. Only two other teams are with them, and that's BYU and Colorado. So just to give you an idea of where the Big 12 is standing right now. And then Arizona is trying to bounce back after, well, they were able to bounce back after a KSU loss, got a huge Utah win. Got to continue it into this one. If they can get this win, then maybe they're back in that conversation for the Big 12. If Texas Tech gets it, then they might be one of the most dangerous teams in the conference. They have every ability to compete with pretty much every team in this conference. I think Taj Brooks is finding his groove. They have an underrated wide receiver duo. They have so many elite wide receivers on that team. And then you got a quarterback in Barron Morton that is slowly finding himself in that offense. It's going to be tons of fun to watch this one unfold. I think when you have T-Mac and Noah Fafita on the field, you feel pretty good. You're going to get some points in this one, and I feel pretty good that we're going to get some points in this one. It's going to be a really fun matchup. I think I'd lean Arizona in it, but I'm not necessarily super gung-ho about that. I think any game in the Big 12, frankly, if you pick with a lot of confidence, you might just be a little bit crazy. It's going to be incredible to watch this game unfold, and whoever comes out on top is definitely looking at Arlington as a very real possibility this year. This week is going to be really fun. I think it's one of those weeks where obviously you don't have the marquee matchups that you love to have. You have a ton of matchups that are right in that second, third tier that are going to be so much fun to watch. So cannot wait for those. Obviously, we'll break them all down on Monday's show, but let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we're going to get to all of the questions I have for this upcoming weekend. One of the bigger ones I have is what's actually on the line down there in Tallahassee this upcoming weekend between Clemson and Florida State, because obviously it's not necessarily an ACC title by any means. So we'll break it all down right after this, so stick with us.